Alright, it is time to learn how to make the Roo Blanket of the Made with Cozy kits. This blanket is about 28 by 35 inches, perfect for a baby-sized blanket. It is super soft and machine washable. Alright, so it is time to open that Made with Cozy box. This is the most exciting part, right? So first you're going to find the end of the yarn, go ahead and pull that out and then unravel a little bit of the yarn ball. You're going to leave a tail about 24 inches long or so, and then you're going to do a classic slip knot. You want that slip knot to be about 2 inches long from the knot to kind of the top of the loop. So for our first row, you're going to stick your fingers through that slip knot and pull through some yarn, creating another new loop. This loop should also be about 2 inches long, or however long you made that first slip knot. And you are going to continue just pulling yarn through each little loop, creating new loops until you have created 17 loops or stitches. 17 stitches is the length you'll need to make the Roo blanket. Once you have finished creating your chain, just count to make sure that you actually have 17 loops. If you have too few, go ahead and make another loop or however many you need. And if you have too many, just go ahead and pull some out. Now for the next row, the first thing to remember is the last loop of the previous row is the first loop of the next row. So you're just going to skip that last loop you just did. Then under each little bump there's a hole, and you are just going to stick your fingers through that hole, pull that yarn, and create another new loop. Again, you want this loop to be about the same size as all the other ones you have created. So in this case they're about 2 inches, or just match it. So find the holes under each of those bumps to pull that yarn through and create your new loops until you've done the entire row. You want to count once you're done with those to make sure that you actually have 17. If you have too few, you might have to go back to that very first row and add one, or if you have too many, you might want to go back to that very first row and take a stitch out. Now moving on to the next row, again remember that last stitch is the first stitch, so we can just skip it. And you're going to go ahead and pretty much like before, except for it's a little bit easier to find these loops, you're going to stick your fingers through the loop, grab the yarn, pull it out through to make a new loop. And you're going to do this all the way along each row. Periodically count your stitches to make sure you have 17. If at some point you have 16, you're going to have to take out some yarn until you find where you skipped a stitch, and then fill that stitch in and keep going again. Now comes the fun part, when you get to binge watch some Netflix or turn on your favorite music and just pull through some yarn. So you will come across some knots that we had to make to create your big ball of yarn. We've made these pretty much invisible. All you need to do is, as you're pulling through the loops, just make sure that knot ends up on the back side of the blanket and keep on going. Just remember to count those stitches so you don't have to backtrack too far if you drop one. When you get to the end of your yarn ball, you're going to want to stop knitting when the yarn can go back and forth across your blanket about 4 times. To finish off the blanket, you are going to pull a loop through like you normally would, except you're going to make it a little bit bigger. Then you're going to grab the loop next to it, put them together before you pull through the next loop. So basically you are like adding 2 loops together before you pull through that second loop. Then you're going to pull that loop through. You're going to add it to the next loop and then pull the next one through. When you get to that last stitch, you're just going to want to pull the tail all the way through and then gently pull it tight. Next, we're just going to weave that tail back and forth through the blanket to hide it. There's no rhyme or reason to this really, just pull it back and forth through the stitches until you've kind of reached the end of it. You want to make sure that you're not pulling this tail super tight because it will kind of cinch up the end of your blanket. So go ahead and just pull the ends of your blanket apart to make sure that it's not getting too tight. Once you've reached almost the end of the tail, you're just going to tie it in a double knot onto one of the stitches on the back of the blanket. So just pick any loop that looks good, pull it through and tie 2 knots onto it. You want to gently tighten that knot by pulling down on that yarn. If you pull too hard, sometimes the yarn snaps, and if it snaps like in the knot, it's okay. That's why we have such a long tail. You can kind of retie that knot if you need to. And then once those knots are tied and tight, you are just going to cut right against the knot and then kind of twist it back into the blanket and you won't even know it's there. Now you're just going to flip over the blanket to the side that we started at where we left a tail, and you're going to do the same thing. You're just going to weave that tail into the end of the blanket and then tie a double knot onto one of the loops on the back. And there you have your completed Roo blanket. Time to snuggle up and get cozy.